All right, well, I guess we could get started. Let me tell you a little bit about Sherry Studley. She comes to us tonight from the Bridges Transition Program through Seattle Public Schools. Um, Dr. Studley, or as she likes to be called, Sherry, has spent the last 12 years in the district in the special education department. And she's been supervising the 16 to 21 transition services since 2013. She became an educator in 1988, where she worked at several schools here in Seattle until she moved to California, got her master's and doctorate, and became a special ed teacher. So she has been all over every part of special education over the past 25 years. Did I get all that right? Great. So thanks for joining us tonight, and I'll turn that over to you. And if anybody has any questions, just feel free to put them in the chat and we'll go ahead and have Sherry answer them at the end.
And that, I want to tell you folks, thank you for being here. I talk to lots and lots of families. Usually we have nighttime events at the John Stanford Center where parents can come and learn about transition services and Bridges in particular. And this was not the year for that. So I have been presenting at different high schools. I've been meeting with parents individually. And I think this field is tremendously important. The way that the federal government views it, the transition services we offer are judged by how well we do when the students have left the district. And so I'm going to put the slideshow up in a second, but the name of the slideshow is "The Mission is Transition." And when I present something like this to staff, district staff, it's called "We Are All Transition Teachers." And I include the developmental preschool in that. Everything we do is about what happens when they leave the district. And too often we get stuck on, I have to teach her long division, or I have to teach him, how to write his E's correctly in cursive. And we do get stuck in the weeds. And so part of what I do for staff is help them poke their heads above the weeds and get the perspective of where we're going to end up. And what I try to do is provide that for families as well, because there's nothing like being a parent for being in the weeds. So put the slideshow up in a second, but the name of the slideshow is "The Mission is Transition." And when I present something like this to staff, district staff, it's called "We Are All Transition Teachers." And I include the developmental preschool in that. Everything we do is about what happens when they leave the district. And too often we get stuck on, I have to teach her long division, or I have to teach him, how to write his E's correctly in cursive. And we do get stuck in the weeds. And so part of what I do for staff is help them poke their heads above the weeds and get the perspective of where we're going to end up. And what I try to do is provide that for families as well, because there's nothing like being a parent for being in the weeds. So that's sort of the big picture. And then I'm going to try to see, oh, there it is. I'm always happy when this works. Okay. All right, let's see. Okay, can people see that? I'm seeing heads nodding. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for having your cameras on. Sometimes I present entirely to avatars. My staff does this. I have 70 people on my staff, and I'm presenting to avatars. And one time my computer went out and I didn't know it, and nobody told me. And they thought it was funny, and I did not so much think it was funny, but we all get over it. So the mission is transition. Okay, so one of the things that we did once we passed the original law, PL 94142, which provided for special education in schools, is we started doing research on every aspect of students with disabilities. That had been done before, but not necessarily with the idea of including them in the mainstream of life. What we found is that students with disabilities, and that includes your garden variety students with just communication disorders or specific learning disability, or social emotional issues, they have a harder time entering post-secondary school and staying there successfully they have a harder time getting jobs and staying in them successfully than their non-disabled peers. Um, and what we know is that students with disabilities require direct instruction in areas where their disabilities have an adverse impact. I personally have a learning disability. It's called dyscalculia. And you would think it would just affect math, but oh no, it does not. It's hard to sequence things. It's hard to follow steps in order. So imagine cooking with a recipe. Um, I crochet, but I can't follow the instructions. So I just have to make up my own. There's making airline reservations is a nightmare. There's numbers and sequencing everywhere. So these disabilities have kind of an umbrella impact on people like us. And it doesn't matter how bright you are. Um, when you are impacted by your disability, what you need is a really good teacher. Now, it might not be a certificated teacher. It might be a mom or a dad or an aunt or an uncle. It might be a really good boss. But it's somebody who says, okay, you need to be up here and you're somewhere down here. Let's get you up where you need to be so you can do what you can do. And for transition services, what we're looking at is really a coordinated set of activities for a student that are based on their post-secondary goals. So if any of you have students who are going to be 16 during their next IEP cycle or who are already 16, they'll have a transition plan. That's in addition to the main IEP. Often it's when students are freshmen, sometimes sophomores, and occasionally in 8th grade. Depends on when the student entered school. And what the student is supposed to do is say, okay, I want this kind of education and training to be happening when I leave the district. I want this kind of work when I leave the district. And if the student's IEP team qualifies them, this kind of picture of independent living or adult living for myself. And then what's supposed to happen is that transition plan is supposed to drive the rest of the IEP. In reality, we're also working towards high school diploma. And sometimes we get sidetracked too much into diploma and we forget about transition, or sometimes we focus on transition and we miss graduation requirements. So there's a real art to this. But the transition plan literally is supposed to drive that IEP. And these are the kinds of things that you'd expect that are based on what my transition specialist, Glenn, calls the SNPs, the students' strengths, needs, interests, and preferences. And then what we're supposed to do as the rest of the IEP team is figure out what kind of instruction do they need. Let's say the student wants to be in the culinary arts when they leave the district. So what kind of instruction are they going to need from the time they get that transition plan until the time they enter a culinary arts program or an on-the-job training or get a job in a restaurant? What kind of community experiences will they need to have? What kind of employment development will they need to have? And there's agencies that support that. What kind of daily living skills will they need to have when that's appropriate for the student? And sometimes that will involve a functional vocational evaluation. And the thing I'll say is, because I come out of academia, I would say you wouldn't want to write a reading goal without some kind of assessment. Assessment drives instruction. You also wouldn't want to write post-secondary goals without doing some kind of assessment. So what you should be hearing about in your IEP meetings for your students with transition plans are the career inventories they've taken, the interest inventories they've taken, and God willing, there's in the Venn diagram of career and interest inventories, there's an overlapping between the two circles. Sometimes we have to jerry rig that a little bit. So there should be some kind of, the term of art is age appropriate transition assessment. There should be some kind of thing that says, here's what the student's strengths are. Here's what we've identified as their needs. The student, if they can, will identify their own interests and preferences, but we can also identify that through observation, both from home and at school, especially if students are nonverbal. And we have tools to do that as well. Right now, one of my transition teachers, who's a district leader in this stuff, her son actually goes to Lincoln High. identified for me when I asked her, because she knows this field probably at least as well as I do. She identified 200 age appropriate transition assessments that she looks at depending on what kind of kid she has. Because in special ed, it really matters, right? To individualize the right assessment for this particular child. And what I'll say is Seattle has a weird transition program. I think it's really good, but then I invented it because what happens in most districts is that a high school will have a self-contained class called transition, and those students won't be enrolled in classes. They will be put there when they're 18, and they'll stay in there till they're 18 to 20, till they're 21, or the June after their 21st birthday. And they will have community-based instruction and work experiences. And the problem is there's capacity issues, right? There's one teacher, there's one classroom. So if one year you have 20 students, you'll get a bunch of IAs, instructional assistants, and they'll say deploy them all over the area, and that's great. But when I inherited Bridges in 2013, not all the high schools had transition programs. Roosevelt had two. Hale had one. Garfield and Franklin didn't have one at all. Rainier Beach didn't have one. Ballard did. And some of the programs we have, and I'll talk about where they are later, are leftovers from that time. But literally, we had a caseload limit of 9 students in a classroom, and we had 9 classrooms in the district. Even though we had 12 comprehensive high schools and 3 alternative high schools, we had 9 programs. So we had a total of 81 seats for students. And there were years, and this happens in other districts, where they say, well, we can't take you at age 18. Or we take you and we're so overburdened, the teacher's so overwhelmed that you don't get very good services. And so students, instead of having a job internship every day, they have one once a week, or a couple hours, a couple days a week. We solved that problem by creating Bridges as a school. And what that means is the number of students from any given year who are turning 18 and whose IEP teams decide they need transition services will vary from year to year. I thought it would vary up and down, but since our original limit of 81 students back in 2013, we're at over 170 for next fall. And it's been going up every year. We went from 9 teachers, and now I have 20. And so at some point, I'm assuming there will be fewer students, and there will be an ebb and a flow, but right now there's just a flow. But that's one of the things that one of the gifts that we have. The other issue we have is not all of our sites are on school district sites, so they don't have nurses. So students that have nurses are limited to, or students who need a full-time nurse are limited to certain campus locations. It's hard for us to take students with severe behaviors because they have to be safe in the community. We don't have security out there. And at a lot of our sites, we don't have security at all. And we did, when we became a school, we had to hire infrastructure, which nobody had thought of. Not one of us. I mean, all of us, come from academia and forgot we needed a registrar and a secretary. So once we got that all straightened out, Bridges became a school, and it functions pretty well. And we'll talk more about that later on. And North Shore also operates a program like ours that is a separate program, and they have a hub. They're a much smaller district, so all their students can go to one place. I don't ever try to get all of Bridges in one place. It takes too long and there's too many people. All right, so we kind of talked about this. The transition IEP process is the year a student's going to turn 16. The case manager, or if they're having a reevaluation that year, sometimes the school psychologist will conduct an age-appropriate transition assessment. We use one called the BPAS. Some of you, well, maybe none of you are familiar with it because probably none of you have sent students to us yet, but essentially we use a rubric that was developed by adult agencies that support adult workers with disabilities. And and we adapted it for our use. It's about 8 pages long. It doesn't take too long to fill out, but you can use it as early as middle school to do age appropriate transition assessment. What we do is we look at the whole child. So we look at their their independent living skills. We look at their executive functioning skills. We look at can they persist at tasks? Do they stay on task? Can they complete work? What kind of academic skills do they have? Bridges serves the entire continuum of special education, from twice exceptional to medically fragile and everybody in between. So we'll take, whoever we can, provide for. And the BPAS will cover all of that. But we want to get a good look at this entire human being that we're dealing with. So that, because the important thing for us is that we're not following a medical model. We're not looking at where the student falls short and trying to diagnose anything. What we're doing is saying, what are the strengths the student has? And how can we build on them? And our goal is independence, and that the student has as many choices as possible. So the case manager will draft a transition plan for the IEP team, and that includes a projected graduation date. Now, by the numbers, most students with IEPs will graduate from high school in 4 or 5 years, like most other students. And there may be some modifications to their classes. There may be some IEP team decisions that change some of the graduation requirements for those students. However, they'll earn a diploma, or they'll at least meet graduation requirements. Once a student has a transition plan, they must be invited to their own IEP meeting. Now, I have a bias here. I taught kindergarten students who came to their own IEP meetings and presented. My 7th graders, when I worked at McClure, my 7th graders presented their IEPs. So when I started supervising Bridges and teachers were talking for the students, who themselves can talk, a lot of them, I was sort of shocked. And we've been working on the students. So we have the students create a slideshow about their transition plan. That's the part that they show and talk about. And then the students who are nonverbal or have limited verbal skills take part in making the slideshow and help us create it and help us make sure that it's accurate. And then we present it for them. But we're really all about empowering the students and giving them skills so they can be independent, because really what you look at when you're looking at a program like Bridges is it's a 3-year program to turn them from high school kids into adults. And some of us are late bloomers, and we need direct instruction to be adults. And I'm just going to say I was one of those people, so no shame here. If you need direct instruction, you need direct instruction. The course of study part of the IEP, of the transition plan, is really, okay, so you have these post-secondary goals. You want to go to college, you want to work full-time in the culinary arts, you want to be a laborer and in the housing trades, you want to work as a teacher's assistant, whatever that goal is. What classes do we need to have you take so you're ready for that goal? What kinds of instruction do we need to do in your special ed class so you are able to meet that goal? What kinds of career and technical education courses do you need to take to meet that goal? Do you need job internships? Do you need job shadowing? That's the kind of stuff that's in the course of study. It really looks like a list of things with a bunch of X's in boxes, but that's what it's supposed to mean. So if you're going through your IEP process with your case manager and you see things in that list that you think would be good in terms of helping your child meet those post-secondary goals, I'm going to tell you that it's okay to speak up about it. And it's okay for your kids to speak up about it. I used an old term here, occupational education. That's the same thing as career and technical ed. That's the new term. Old people have a hard time changing their terms of art. But we are, that the graduation pathways are sort of changing, and students can be in more than one pathway. Many of our students are on a pathway of academically meeting the IEP, the graduation requirements, but they're also on a vocational track. And I think that's good, because really, when I saw who was out there at the community college level, and we do serve students at the community college level, so we get to see who they are. Nobody's setting the world on fire adult wise at the community college level unless they got some really good training. Maybe they did a lot of childcare for their extended family, or they've had lots of jobs, and they've developed a real sense of self. But when you're 18 and you're starting college, your brain's still forming. And it's still a big adventure learning how to navigate a whole new campus. What I will say is I still expect our students to mostly meet graduation requirements. And if they come to Bridges, they'll get those diplomas when they leave Bridges. So they'll still get their diplomas. And if you know, I don't know if you know about Kevin's Law, but there are students who, whether they meet graduation requirements or not, whether they're going to leave and go to college or get a job or go to Bridges, they all have the right to cross the stage on graduation and attend all the graduation parties and events with their same age peers. But if they're coming to Bridges, we don't report them to the state as graduated, and we certainly hold their diploma until they leave. So moving on. We talked about this a little bit. Every year we conduct an age appropriate transition assessment. Every year we discuss the post-secondary goals. You've probably had the experience of saying to your child, what do you want to be when you grow up? And you can get a variety of, I don't know, to NBA star or ballerina. And, sometimes that happens and sometimes it doesn't. But they change their minds sometimes. And even in Bridges, students, we put students in a culinary arts track because they really, really like cooking. And after a couple of years, they say, you know what, I've had my fill of cooking. I'm done with it now. I'll cook for myself, but I want to do something different. And that's fine too. Adults all over the world do that, where they change career tracks, and we will support the students if that's what happens. Let me see. Every year, the high school is supposed to provide the course of study, what those courses and activities the student needs to meet those goals. And every year, we're supposed to monitor progress on those. And where you get that report is at the next IEP meeting. So if you've had it, if this is your second or third year with a transition plan, part of what should happen is we should talk about those goals and kind of look back and say, hey, does this, we did this career inventory and this interest inventory, and you say you want to do this, but you don't seem to have any interest in it. Can we talk about this? So having a real conversation about it is really important. And then these are the kinds of things you can expect to see as far as high school based transition services. You can get direct instruction in adaptive and life skills, social emotional learning, study organizational skills as appropriate for each student. Those would be things they qualified for through their IEP. Of course, related services, especially communication, are really important. Communication in the workplace is huge. And career and technical education classes, they're required for graduation, but they're also a really good idea. The Skills Center has wonderful instructors, and I cannot recommend it enough. And then there's the Exploratory Internship Program, which is at every single high school. That's a program I support. It's sort of Bridges Junior. And those students are mostly students who are in resource access and SEL pathways, who are, their day is full. They're already taking a full load of academics towards high school graduation. They maybe have a special ed class in place of an elective. And so if they want work experience, they do what most students do. They get a job after school and on weekends. And we support those students. You can, if you do 180 hours of work, you can get half credit in career and technical ed and worksite learning and our teachers they only work with special ed students or students with 504 plans. So all the students with disabilities can be supported. They can be supported by other teachers on their campuses, but my teachers are itinerant. And so they'll actually go out to all the work sites and observe the students in their work sites. They'll communicate with their site supervisors. The students will complete an electronic portfolio and present it at an IEP meeting, and that will become part of their transition assessment. It's actually pretty rich, and through that we develop a resume and a cover letter and the kinds of things that you'd expect an employee to start having as they were going into the work world. Okay. And then there's programs that are offered also through the central office. Um, there's another part of the exploratory internship program. If you hear XIP, that's what I'm talking about. There's a mailroom in the basement of the John Stanford Center. And students come to us, and these are usually students in the moderate intensive or SM2 kind of pathway. Um, they work in the basement in the mailroom with a job coach. That's what we call our instructional assistants. And in the morning, they're sorting the mail that comes in from all the schools and from the US mail. And they sort it to deliver to all the departments in the John Stanford Center on the second and third floor. And in the afternoon shift, the students are there for a half day, literally delivering the mail to all the departments and picking up the mail from the departments to go out to all the schools. And the only way mail gets delivered in the John Stanford Center is our students. And for the last year, people have had to go to the basement and root through the boxes for their own mail, and they're looking forward to having us back. But the coolest thing is, I don't know how many of you have been to the John Stanford Center, but it's big and open, and there's very few walls that go to the ceiling. And I was lost for the first 2 weeks I worked there. It's hard to find your way around, and there's still some departments I don't know how to get to. So our students, despite the fact that they have trouble with reading, writing, and math, they learn to find their way around that. We put arrows up in some places. I'll give you that, but they know their way around that building. They memorize that route. They develop relationships with the people in the basement, because there's a lot of stuff that happens in the basement. There's a whole warehouse down there. So there's a whole bunch of relationships of the warehouse folks who love our students and look forward to seeing them every day. And there's adult to adult relationships. And then when they go and deliver mail, boy, you should see the faces of John Stanford folks when they get to see kids. It's just nice to be around students. So our students are very popular. And then we have just a cadre of students in the district for whom they're going to come to Bridges. They're going to age out. They're not going to earn an academic diploma. And they've really had it with school. Like sitting for 6 hours is going to make them explode at some point. And those are students that we find half-day internships for, that we support so that they can be out in the work world. We can check in with them and make sure they still get 1.5 credits because they're still earning credits, even if they're going to eventually age out. And we individualize those internships for those students. They're really students that need to be active. They can't just sit in the desk 6 hours a day. And the thing I will say to you that I love is that, we have these students with mild to moderate disabilities. And they do earn diplomas. Most of them do. But it's hard for them. It's exhausting. And every day in school, up until the end of the 12th grade, everything they do in a high school, in any school, is targeted directly at the areas where they have deficits. And so they're faced with their deficits every hour of every day, 180 days a year. And they're heroic in that they persist with this, but it's still hard. And then they come to Bridges, and we're still doing academics with them, but we do it like they did in elementary school. We say, okay, you need 15 minutes a day of reading. We're going to do 15 minutes a day, not 55. And then we get to go out and do active things. And boy, these kids just blossom. They get to go out and be active. They get to do things. They get to pick what they want to do. And we don't have behavior problems. I have never once had to discipline a student because they love it. It's like field trips every day, and it's all instructional, but it's stuff they get to pick, and they're driving the bus, and it's kind of nice. We don't let them really drive the whole bus because, again, brains are still forming, but we let them steer sometimes. Okay. So here's the thing. So they have this transition IEP and we think they're going to graduate in 4 years and things are going along. And then we start seeing that, you know what? They might need something after high school. They've gotten super good at high school. They can find their way around the building independently. They can talk to their teachers. They can advocate for their own accommodations. Some of them, it's, they've learned high school really well. But then once they get out of high school, then what? They're not ready to work often. They've spent their whole time working on diploma. Um, they still need, it's usually in the executive functioning realm. And of course, for the students who are going to qualify for services from the Department of Developmental Disabilities, DDA, their services don't start until the students turn 21. And so they really need something to do so that they're not practicing sitting on the couch for 3 years. So the IEP team makes a decision that students are going to complete high school and then have some special ed after that. And that's how students get to Bridges. If they have a diploma and they're reported to the state as graduated, we can't help them. Literally, our students are still 12th graders because there's no higher grade. That's the highest number we go to. So you just can't be reported out. Okay. And then the other thing I'll say to you is some of your children may have had changes of special education placement. They might have started out in, what we used to call the generic classroom that was 13 students instead of 26 or 30. They might have started out in general ed, in resource, and gone to some other special ed placement. Going to transition is just another placement change within special education. It's an IEP team decision, and it requires an IEP amendment. And you have to have central office involvement when there's an IEP team amendment that's going to do a change of placement, but that's where I come in. I go to those meetings, or my staff does, and we support the team in writing an IEP for not for the rest of their senior year, because obviously the school team will do that. And then we sort of give some advice about what that IEP could look like the following fall. Okay. And transition assessments can be formal or informal. So a lot of our stuff is based on our observation. We give students two choices and see which things they pick. They can point to the hand that we're holding PECs in. They can point to pictures on a computer or piece of paper. They can use an iPad, or we can observe them doing different kinds of work and seeing what they're good at. We also do, of course, the regular academic strengths and deficit testing, and look at their life skills and vocational interests, aptitudes, and abilities. And these are the kinds of things that we look at for community-based job internships. And that's why there's so much direct instruction in Bridges, because students need to know what kind of hygiene and dress they need, what kind of social behavior skills they need. They need to understand the shape of time. How much work can I get done in it in a certain amount of time? How do I make sure I show up on time for my breaks? They need to know how to take transportation, about community safety, communication, work or task completion, sustaining effort, following directions, and then cooperation with others. Depending on the situation of your individual children, some of these are pretty challenging. I'm a supervisor of many employees, and I see the people having challenges with these, even if they're neurologically typical. So these are the kinds of things we spend a lot of time on in Bridges. And here's where we'll talk about adult service agencies. So technically, all adults with disabilities are protected and covered and can receive services from the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation. DVR technically will find somebody a job and make sure they're stable in that job for 90 days. They'll back off, and they stay backed off until that person comes back and says, I need another job. In reality, because of budgeting constraints, DVR will serve the people with the greatest disabilities first. And so if you have a child who has an IEP, but they have maybe one goal in reading comprehension, it's likely they won't get direct one-on-one services, but they can get pre-employment transition services through their school, or families can sign up for those. And those are group um, opportunities. And DVR has hired vendors, different businesses that will train people in different transition related topics. And they vary widely. Open Doors for Multicultural Families in the South End has coursework through pre-ETS on how to make friends, how to make and keep friends, what is consent, sex ed, including responsible relationship building. So there's that kind of stuff, as well as the vocational oriented stuff. And there are other vendors that as well who can provide that. And DVR, they're on the DSHS website, and they have a North End office, and they're great people. I see them at a lot of IEP meetings. And you can sign your students up, or at least try to sign up and see if you can qualify them starting at age 16. The Developmental Disability Services, or DDA, these are people with intellectual disabilities or developmental delays or disabilities who were born in those situations. So since birth, and there's a significant level of impairment. And I'll tell you why these are important. If you have a student who is DDA qualified and they come to Bridges, or even if they stay at the high school for 7 years until they're 21, and you sign up for DVR, then King County School to Work can come in and do a really robust handoff from the district to the adult services, including on-the-job vocational assessments, and working together with the IEP team to help that student find a job, so that there is no drop-off after they leave Bridges or high school. They just go right into adult work like the next week. And it's good to be signed up with those agencies. If you're a family that, like me, has trouble filling out forms and following directions, I will advise you that both Open Doors for Multicultural Families and the ARC of King County have people who can help you with that. If you need to get guardianship for your children before they turn 18, it's a lot easier if you do it before they turn 18 than after. Again, both of those organizations can help you with that process, and also with SSI issues. And the thing I like about Open Doors is they have a really large employed force who speak many, many, many languages. So I send a lot of our families to Open Doors because they live and work in the communities with our families. They speak the language and they know transition services up and down. I learn things from them all the time. So I highly recommend, if you're not one of the last rugged individualists and you don't want to go it alone, chat with Open Doors or the ARC of King County. They're good people and they will help you. And they'll help your adult child for life. So it's a good deal. Okay. Let's see. I did not mean to do that. So these are the skills that we're looking at that are required for post-secondary schools. And I will tell you that we have a program at Highline College for students with intellectual disabilities. It's called Achieve. And because it's a special program that we do not offer in the district, we pay the tuition for that program. It's a 2-year program. They've got an embedded DDA vendor. And again, it's specifically for students with intellectual disabilities. And we have about 10 students in there in any given year. But we also have 30 to 50 students at the 3 community colleges in Seattle in any given year. And I will tell you why. I learned this when I was teaching resource. I had started off with in residential treatment and day treatment for special ed. And then I worked my way up from self-contained classes to resource. And by the time I got to resource, I was at a high school. And my students, I felt like they were smart. They had average to above average intelligence. I knew their IQ scores. I could see them in their evaluations. There was no reason that they shouldn't be successful in school, but they were not successful in school. Some of them, they were failing classes, they were missing assignments, there were incomplete assignments, um, and it wasn't their intellect; it was their executive functioning skills. And so, academic ability is important to go to college. If you want to pass the GED, it's at the 10th grade level. It's big, but there's a whole list of component skills that are necessary to do well in college, and you can see them on the slide. Um, and it's not that everybody who goes to college is stellar in all of these uh, component skills, but what I will say is the more hits you have against you on this list, the harder college is going to be. And so my staff are stationed on the college campuses, and that's where the students meet them. And we support them in improving these skills because everybody's got some of all of them if they're going to college. But we are serving a population of students who we know darn well would not be successful in college without our support. And when we give them coaching in how to manage time and becoming aware, like look around the classroom, what's everybody else doing right now? If they're getting out a blue book, you'd better get out a blue book. And that shows you how old I am because all the tests are probably on computers now. But that's the kind of stuff we're working on at the college level. So there are people who tell me my kid wants to go to school. And truly, we do have students who've come out of the mod intensive pathway who have mild intellectual disabilities, and they take classes at the community college all the time. They're not necessarily pursuing an AA degree, but they're taking classes in areas of interest like computers or office. We have a lot of students who want to be office assistants, nursing assistants, teaching assistants, and they take certificate courses. And some people just take like fun courses. And we can support them. We don't go to class with them. We don't help them with the work. We don't let them cheat. But we do support them so that they can direct all of their intellect to the coursework and teach them strategies for how to be successful. And so even our students with intellectual disabilities who've gone to college have passed their classes. And some of our students have made the dean's list, and 6 of our students have gotten full ride scholarships to 4-year colleges. So working on these skills matters. And working on these skills matters starting in, if you don't start in middle school, some of us are not going to be ready for prime time. So for sure, you can double up in high school and get it. But sometimes students need a year with us before they can start college classes. And that's fine too. If we have them for 3 years, they can still even get an AA degree in the remaining 2 years. But I cannot overstate the importance of these skills. So I'm going to skip the 5th grade thing and the middle school thing, but these are things that we should be looking at for our 14 to 16-year-olds. They should all have household chores and get an allowance. And the reason I say this now, this is just my opinion. There's a bunch of us who like allowance because it teaches kids to budget and save money and learn how to spend money in a sensible way. And if they say to you, I need $5 for this, and every time they get it, they don't learn how to manage money. So those of us who work in transition have this opinion. You're free to have your own. I'm not trying to interfere with your parenting. And there are students who said to me, I don't do household chores because school is so hard and I spend so much time on it. And I buy that. I buy that. There's an exhausting piece to education when you have a disability. But certainly, to the extent that it's possible, performing household chores, getting an allowance, volunteering or job shadowing, getting out in the community and developing personal safety skills, learning to have fun. We go on field trips once a week in Bridges. We're learning to have fun. We're literally doing direct instruction in fun. And I have a teacher who is the ticket whisperer, and he gets us free tickets to sporting events and the aquarium every year. And now we're starting to get those because we're going to start to be able to go back. Students should also have pre-vocational skills. And what we did at McClure when we looked at what our school-wide expectations would be for all the students in the classrooms was we talked to employers and we said, what do you need from employees? Well, they need to be on time. They need to be prepared to work. They need to spend their work time working, and they need to have good social skills. And so the pre-vocational skills we did in middle school were the ones you see on this slide. That's all you, if that's all you worry about from 14 to 16, that's actually pretty good. I also think students probably need to sit down and look at their IEP progress reports and talk about how close they are to mastery of those goals and what they think would help us, help what they think we can do to help them meet their goals better. And I've had kids at 11 years old give me advice about what would work best for them, and they've been right. So I think we can, some of the kids really know themselves. And if they don't, we can help them get to know themselves by doing some experiments. Okay, you don't know if you would prefer this or this. Let's try one, let's try the other, and then we'll talk about it. So it's a really good opportunity before students are getting work permits and going to work on some of those skills. And again, working on their SNPs, right? Strengths, needs, interests, and preferences. And then from 17 to 21, volunteer and paid opportunities after school or in summer. Start compiling a list of people who can support them in different ways and community organizations that can help them. Definitely the family exploring guardianship and transfer of rights before they're 18. They need to start looking at healthcare insurance post 18, and maybe the changing of doctors between 18 and 21 out of the pediatrics and into adult medical care, planning for their living situation. They should be looking at their diploma decision because we made that, right? We said they graduate in 4 years, but are they still on track? Because when I taught seniors, they were making up their freshman year during their senior year. So, are you on track to graduate in 4 years? And then aligning transition services towards independence. And that is a tough one because even special ed teachers, I'm not going to speak for families, but I can speak for our profession. In our profession, we do too much for students. And that's an occupational hazard, and we have to constantly be on guard against it. If we're giving students undue service, if we're doing things for them that they could do themselves, we're disabling them. And we want to enable them. We want them empowered. And creating an updating their resume and employment portfolio, that is something we do through the exploratory internship program, and that they can do in career choices through career and technical education. That's a entry-level course for a lot of students. And then applying for adult services is something the family should start looking at in those years. Okay, so we did talk a little bit about how Bridges is a school. And let's see if this is still accurate. We are at 4 hospitals. So we're at Providence, Mount St. Vincent in West Seattle. We're at Swedish Hospital in Ballard and on First Hill. And we are at Children's Hospital. That's a Project Search program for students in their last year. We have programs for students with mild to moderate impairments. They're all over the place now. We're at the Old Rocks Hill building in West Seattle. We're at Rainier Beach High School. We're at Ingram High School. I think next year we're going to be somewhere in the North End. I don't know where yet, but probably at one of the schools in a portable. And we're going to be at one of the schools in the South End in a portable. So these are students generally that have come out of the mod intensive or SM2 settings, and who are, their primary focus is going to be either community college and or work internships. Our Bridges 3 is students that have usually they come out of the distinct pathway. Now there are students that come out of the distinct pathway, and once the focus of school is not academics, they can go and spend most of their day in the field doing work internships and social activities, and they don't need, if they're around students with, say, greater verbal skills, all it will do is improve their verbal skills. So sometimes we do that, but some students need more time in the special ed classroom. So our Bridges 3 students are often about half the day in the special ed classroom and half the day out in the community working or doing social activities. Whereas our Bridges 1 and 2 students are in the classroom maybe an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours a day. Bridges 4 is just our medically fragile program at Rainier Beach High School. And we are all at all the Seattle community colleges as well. So we're kind of all over the city, and we've tried to locate programs that are equitable between North and South, so that students at either end of the city can experience similar kinds of instruction and opportunities. And nobody has to drive all the way across the city. That's just a lot of time. So when we talk about what's my part in transition, this is where I really lay it on thick for the staff, but I think this is good for all of us to look at. Independence. In the general ed setting, what you see is a teacher standing in front of the class saying, you know, here's the grade level standard, come get it. I'm going to talk about it from here. I might walk around and tell you to stop that silly thing, but pretty much I'm going to teach from the front of the class, come get it. In special ed, what we do is say, oh, hi, honey, I'm going to come over to you. You have this little area of skill. I'm going to come closer to you. The standard is too far away, and we're going to scaffold you a little bit so you can get closer to grade level standard. So there is a difference between general and special education. I think for both, we want to avoid undue service. And as a person who, you know, if you just talk to me, most of the time I make sense, and it's not obvious that I have a learning disability. But people can see it sometimes. I took a woodshop class and the teacher just lost patience with me and took all the stuff from me and did it himself. And I was so shocked that I let him do it. But afterwards, we had a very spicy conversation because I still know nothing about woodworking. That was not a helpful class. So it was actually disabling in that case. He gave me way too much undue service. His job was to teach me how to do it. And if he says, you're not very good at this. And I said, that's why I'm taking the class. So, you know, you've got to walk that line between giving enough service, but not going overboard. And then self-advocacy, a lot of our students are really passive. And I don't like to see that because passive people can be taken advantage of. And so if I'm going to have a student misbehave, and I don't mean like bad behavior, but if I'm going to have them have a behavior that's inconvenient for me, I'd rather they yell because at least then I know what they want and what they need and what's going on with them. If they fold up in a tight little ball, I don't know. And so I want students to be able to tell me, here's what I need. And I have had students give me advice throughout my long career. I have trouble alphabetizing things. So when I file things, I use colors because otherwise I have to sing the alphabet and I cannot sing. And so I was telling this to a student and she said, why don't you just put a Post-it with the alphabet on it and just run your finger over it? And it was such a smart idea, 12-year-old. So I'm thinking, you know, these guys are smart. I want them to be way more active when they tell me, here's what I need, here's what I want, here's what works for me. I might not agree with them all the time. I'm still going to be in charge of the classroom, but boy, oh boy, do I want to hear what's going on with them. And then building the vocabulary for how to advocate for yourself. So you don't just have to go from passive to blowing up, but you can say, excuse me, please, I have an accommodation in this area. And being able to say that straight out without shame and just, it's a fact. And that's where we're going. And then having students reflect on how their education is going and then act affirmatively to change the things they want to change. So I've seen middle school kids do that. You've probably seen your children do that throughout their lives. That's the kind of thing we really want to support in Bridges. And so, well, this is really more about for practitioners, but I do think that the important thing, because I've also worked with gifted students. I've spent a few years teaching gifted students, and a lot of gifted students, I mean, they're great with academics. It's awesome. But they have a lot of anxiety. Some of them, not all of them, but some of them. And so, and then I have students who have learning disabilities and whatnot. And I sit down with them and I show them I draw the normal curve and I say, here's what your scores are and here's where they are on the normal curve. Here's what that means. You know, you might think that you're not very smart, but you have a real strength here. Like you're above the 50th percentile. So I use those Common Core math skills that we teach starting in, I knew we were teaching them in 7th grade because I was co-teaching in there. And I started saying, this is what the curve means. This is what the statistics mean. You're actually really smart here. You've got some solid skills. So teaching students about their strengths is important, because when they go to school, they're often confronted with their deficits and they don't see their gifts. And then really assessing them so that you can say that, and you're not just blowing smoke at the student, because they know when you're doing that, and then they don't respect you. We do work on civic engagement for students with disabilities. Last fall, obviously, a presidential voting year, and we had students proudly showing us that they had voted. We told them to cover up how they voted, but our students, they were so proud to be able to vote, and we really helped them break down the material and understand where the stands of the different people were, so that they could be informed voters, and then they made their own decisions. But watching these students vote for the first time, wow, that was awesome. And too often people with disabilities aren't counted in laws, and so it's really important that they have a voice, a civic voice. We do a fair bit of teaching about friendship, sexuality, and boundaries, because we have to. Our students don't necessarily understand, some of them, the difference between eye contact and staring, or friendship and stalking. And they don't know how to make and keep friends. I don't know that anybody really understands consent in a way that I feel comfortable. And a lot of our students have safety issues out in the community that we are constantly trying to work on, so that people don't take advantage of them. So this is a big part of what we do, because we're working with this whole human student. And so they tell us stuff, and we're like, well, we better teach you how to manage that. And we also have a social worker who helps us. So that's really helpful. Now, the thing I will tell you is, and I'm going to tell you this for a reason, a lot of the services in Bridges came about because of the post-secondary survey. So the federal government, in wanting to assess how well a district does with its special ed services, has us call all the students who leave a year, starting the June after they left. So students who graduated, students who aged out, students who dropped out. And in Seattle, there's usually between 430 and 480 of those students in any given year. And we call them, and we see if they are still engaged in school or work or military training, or they're on a religious mission. There's certain things that you have to do to be called engaged. We have to be able to contact 70% of those students, and 70% of them have to be engaged in some way. And what I was finding is that we weren't serving even all of the students with intellectual disabilities, which is the target population of transition services nationally. That's the target population. We were missing so many students that about 2/3 of them were not engaged. I found that about 2/3 of students with primary emotional and behavioral disabilities were not engaged a year after leaving school. But the surprising thing I found out was that a bunch of students who came out of resource services, smart students with just learning disabilities and communication disorders, blew out of college, were sitting on a couch a year after they left high school. And that's why we started serving students at the community college level. And it's why we worked hard to get students from every single high school to be served in Bridges. Because if the state's going to judge us on our services, and we know we're looking at a district where a huge chunk of our students weren't being served, we needed to really expand services and expand the continuum of people who got those services, so that we could A, improve the scores, but B, feel good about providing these services in a real way. And so that brings us to the end of my presentation. Now I can take questions. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Sherry. I wanted to ask, for the kids who have mild intellectual disabilities, is there transportation that's provided to whichever Bridges they choose to go, or they go to, or?
Yeah, it's still special ed, so we can do door-to-door service. We can do all the related services.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay.
I'm hearing from a lot of parents during COVID, like recognizing that their students may not be as ready for a 4-year go away college. Some of them have IEPs, but they felt like they were tracking. Do you have a list or a reference for services for students who either might want to start at the community college and go to 4-year colleges, or for students who may want to go to 4-year colleges but would like to know about how to seek support and services within those systems? Is that
I will
does
try.
That make sense?
It does make sense. So I would say I'm going to give you my big bias right up front, and I'm going to be obvious about it being a bias.
Mm-hmm.
But my experience with the community colleges here in Seattle, which is my total experience with community colleges, but that's 8 years, is that they have really good teachers and universities do not. And what people with disabilities need is a good teacher. I mean, universities don't have teachers. They have instructors who, unless they are in the education department, have never been taught how to teach. And they're doctoral students who, unless they are in the education department, have never been taught how to teach. And it matters, right? And we've talked already about how what people with disabilities need is a good teacher. Now, I had to take, as part of my doctoral work with my master's and my special ed credential, and then I taught in a postdoctoral situation, I taught advanced and theoretical statistics with a math disability. And the reason I could do that is because I had good teachers, right? And one of my undergraduate minor is in physics. I taught physics. It's math with stuff, which helps. But because I had good teachers, I could learn it. So if you're going to get a lecturer, I would say to any kid with a disability, start at the community college on purpose. Get your AA degree, learn how to manage time there. Because the thing I know about after 30 odd years in education is that when the demand rises, our students do not. They stay down here and they're not looking around and seeing what the other people are doing. I was one of those people. I had a really rough start to college. And my parents were both teachers. They're retired teachers, okay? And they're like, why are you having such a hard time? Well, part of it was the 70s, but part of it, honestly, was, I was kind of clueless. I'm a very late bloomer. And my brother and I both took more than 4 years to go to college. We needed that direct instruction, and we both went to 4-year schools, and what we got was lecturing. So I would say to anybody with a disability, start at the community college, get your AA degree, and transfer. If you get the right supports, every community college has a writing center. Every community college has tutors. Every community college, if you need it, and you need this accommodation as part of, because you have a disability, you can get free lecture notes. So you can just listen and not try to listen and write, because for some of our students, that's not possible. But that has nothing to do with intellect, right? And so, and they can get that accommodation at a 4-year college, but then they're going to go to somebody who, again, unless they're going to be a teacher, they're going to get somebody who thinks teaching is talking. And if teaching was just talking, then we wouldn't be needing to offer recovery services for the pandemic, right? Because everybody would have gotten it because we said it out loud. So I'm gonna just say that. Now, that said, Seattle Central has the sales program, and that's for students who graduate and want to go to boot camp and get some support and get their AA degree. It's expensive and it's worth it. OLS at Bellevue College, it's separate from Bellevue College, but it got a separate building. It's a separate location, but it's technically part of the college. It's a 4-year AA degree for students with intellectual disabilities. You need to have an IQ of at least 70. It's expensive, but it's worth it. Both of those programs have a high degree of coaching, and they do what Bridges does. They look at executive functioning coaching. They look at self-awareness. They teach the students about the strengths, but also the impacts of their disabilities. And they teach self-advocacy skills. And I've met with students from all of those, both of those programs, and they come out extremely functional. So the Seattle Central program is called SAILS, SAILS. And then OLS, all capital letters at Bellevue College. And I don't remember what it stands for because I don't, Bridges is actually an acronym and I can't tell you what it stands for. Building real life something. It's my disability. I just call it Bridges. So, and then there's different, there's none in this state, but there are college, supportive colleges out of state where you can go sleepaway college, stay in the dorms, and there's programs that support you, but they cost. So I think that, the road I tried to walk as the administrator for Bridges was, how do we provide that at the community college level for free while people are still able to use their tax dollars and get special ed services? If a student is not ready for college, right, they can go after they leave Bridges, and they can use Seattle Promise after they leave Bridges. Or and here's the thing I want to say to you, because some of you might find your children in this situation. There's a 24 credit requirement to graduate now, and students were having a hard time at 20. Right? And so part of the reason I started Bridges U was to support students who weren't going to make it through community college on their own. The other part was, I thought there might be some students who weren't going to graduate in 4 or even 5 years with 24 credit requirements and might not want to be the oldest students on campus and might instead want to be part of a program with people their age where they could get the support they still need due to their disabilities for free. And so your students could literally take a running start course if they're not going to graduate in 4 years and do their 5th year in Bridges with our support at a community college during that 5th year. The running start requirement is that you take and pass a class as an 11th or 12th grader, and that you only take classes at the community college level that qualify for high school graduation, but you will also get college credit for them. So you'll get a head start in college, and it's free. And the way a lot of our students get into Running Start, because they don't get a lot of support from the high schools, because the high schools have to stay on the high school campus. We've had students take yoga classes for PE credit at a community college, and now they're qualified for Running Start. And then we can help them with the academic ones. And that's how we got a lot of our students in there for free, because right now, Seattle Promise, you have to have earned a high school diploma and in order to qualify for Seattle Promise. And they have interpreted that to mean that you have received your diploma. I am working with them to, and maybe by the time some of your students get to us, I will have succeeded in this. We can demonstrate that through transcripts that students have met graduation requirements and should qualify for Seattle Promise. This is really a disability rights issue because the students have to choose between Seattle Promise and no support, or Bridges and pay tuition. And that's not fair. And here's the other thing I'll say about college, and then I'll move on, because I know this is a really long-winded answer. Most of our students who take the entry-level tests to get into math and English language arts don't get into college-level courses right away, because that's where their disability is. And they have to take a standardized test to see if they qualify, and standardized tests are designed to separate people like us out. So they end up in adult basic ed. My perspective is that the adult basic ed teachers are the special ed teachers of the community college campus. They are awesome. At all 3 colleges, they are awesome. We have never had a student fail to get out of ABE into college. And I think I referenced this before, but a bunch of our students every quarter make the dean's list. So their teachers are really good. We are not doing the work for these students. I promise we are not tutors. We're doing specially designed instruction. We're doing strategic instruction. We're not helping them with their work. What we do is allow their intellect to shine instead of their disability. That's really the function of Bridges there. Okay. Next question.
No, thank you. That is a good answer. I think people are realizing their students need a lot more support. And I think you pointed out exactly the issue, the number of kids who push forward to a four-year college and they're just not, they're not prepared emotionally or with maturity or whatever. I'm a big fan of the late bloomer theory. I think that our brains, we've set an arbitrary age for brain development and intellectual development. So thank you. That was a great answer. I tried to get all the notes.
Well, it's being recorded, so you can always hear it again.
Exactly.
I had a, anyone else want to jump in? Right. I was wondering, like, what if the student doesn't have a parent or guardian who's kind of signing them up for all these things? Like, what if, is there some kind of mechanism for catching? And I was also thinking, like, it starts at 16 and maybe these kids are more prone to dropping out. Like, do you feel like, I know you talked about the metric of a year after graduation, but it seems like this could decrease the dropout rate too. Do you know about that at all?
I don't have data on that, so that's my feeling.
Yeah.
And what I can say is, because I just did a 5-year analysis of the data on a post-secondary survey. Mm-hmm. This is the okay. I'm getting all geeked out here. Sorry. It used to be that most of our students, the goal was competitive employment, which is at minimum wage or above, and 20 hours to 40 hours a week. Our competitive employment rate has fallen. And our competitive employment rate has fallen because our college entrance rate has improved so much, but the students are only working part-time and it's less than 20 hours. And so what's happening, they're working and going to school, but they're working 15 hours a week, right? So, and these are students who we know would not have, they would have dropped out of college.
So the metric hasn't caught up with what you think, the metric hasn't changed to what you think it should be.
Well, I don't think we should say to people with disabilities, you should work 20 hours a week if they can't. Some students were going to college and working 20 hours a week. I don't remember how many hours a week I worked, but it was probably around 15 or maybe 20 because I was taking 3 or 4 classes and it was a lot. And so I probably was in the same boat. I needed, I worked over the summers to pay my tuition, and because you could afford to do that then back in the 70s. And so I was working for spending money. So I didn't need a tremendous amount of money. And so I was going to college and working very part-time. And so the students who would normally have not gone to college or dropped out of college instead are going to college and working part-time. And that's the trend, is that Seattle, 46% of our students with disabilities are going to college. And in the state, it's like half that. It was 22 or 23%. And it's only 22 or 23% in the state because of Seattle. Like, we drag the mean way up.
Yeah, I get you.
Right. And so because we're so much bigger than all the other districts. And so when you think about that, and it's not just Bridges. I mean, we are serving about 50 students who are going to college every year for the last 3 or 4 years, but the high schools are doing a much better job as well. And I would say, kudos to all the high schools, because I have nothing to do with that. They're doing that. And Bridges isn't big enough to make that change in the metric, but we're a part of it. And that's the thing that I'm really happy about. Plenty of time to work full time, but get your college degree. If you can get your college degree, that's a victory. Mm-hmm. Oh, and I forgot to tell you, we do have another program at Seattle Central. I don't know if any of your students will ever qualify for this, but it's called the Learning Center. It's for students, general and special ed, who are far behind their graduation time. They're 18 years old, 16 years old, not close to mathematically being able to graduate before they're 21, or have no interest in continuing at a high school. And so they take half-day classes in how to pass the GED courses, tests. And once they pass the GED, they get free community college until AA. And so we have a program. Our program at Seattle Central supports students coming directly out of our high schools, but also students at the Learning Center who have IEPs. And some of those students, foster kids, first in their family to go to college, English language learners, homeless students, they've all earned their AA degrees. And those 4 students I just named off, all are at the UW right now, all of them.
Wow.
On scholarship.
I went ahead and put the link in our chat.
Thank you.
Excellent.
This has been so informative. Thank you. And thank you for your work. This is just amazing what you have helped so many students accomplish. I just feel like we should all give you a hand.
Yeah, thank you.
No, really, thank you.
It's wonderful.
I mean,
Thank you.
Yeah.
I give the credit to my teachers. My teachers are amazing. We have IAs that we call job coaches that are out in the field with our students and helping them with their work. I would say probably 80 of our students have mental health issues serious enough that we're getting them counseling and our social workers supporting them. I'm filling out paperwork, right? I'm sitting in my Springsteen shrine here, doing administrative stuff. The teachers are really great. If your students come to Bridges, they'll get great teachers.
Great.
I believe it. Thank you.
Thank you. It's just such an important program, and I'm thrilled to hear that Seattle is leading the state. You know, we take a lot of criticism for our schools, but then I see these truly innovative programs that are really successful and really serving the people who need to be served. And I'm just so grateful. Thank you.
I'll pass that on to my staff.
Please do. Maybe when COVID's over, we'll treat them to something fun.
And folks, this is what I want to tell you. When I started learning about transition services, I thought my eyes were going to spin in my sockets till I died. It's a huge field. It's very confusing. All the adult agencies sound like they're the same, and they're not. You may need to hear this several times. Yeah. So I would like to invite you to come to our open house in the fall, because I'm hoping we'll have one, even if we have to do appointments and have 30 people come at a time to the Stanford Center Auditorium. I invite you to, if you think your students might be interested, you can come observe. They can come observe. I'm happy to answer your questions. If you have questions later, you can contact me directly. I'm happy to hear from you. And, you know, it's huge. Mm-hmm. It's huge, but I will say that there are really good supports for the lifetime of your student out there. Once they leave the district, good things are happening.
That's great to know, because I think a lot of people do come away with thinking, oh gosh, once they're aged out, they're aged out and I have nothing for them. And I hear that a lot from a lot of people who just don't know. Right. Or they're not given options.
I was supporting a family who had a student in the distinct pathway several years ago when I was a regional supervisor in the North End. And the father, you know, he just kept insisting that we put his nonverbal child in the general ed setting, and it made the kid flip out. It was too much sensory stuff. Mm-hmm. So I said, what is it that you're looking for? And he said, well, when he's 18, you're going to kick him out of school, and then what's going to happen to him? And so when I told him there were transition services on adult agencies, you know, you could just see the look on his face. And so I do train parents at the preschool level. We do talk to elementary parents. At our last Bridges night, we had the parents of a 3-month-old child who they already knew had disabilities, low vision, poor hard of hearing, probably going to have autism, breathing problems, right? You can imagine. And they said, can our child have a job someday? Yeah. We've had students who are blind and deaf with autism come through our program. They're engaged a year later. They're still engaged. So we have deaf students. We have students in wheelchairs. We have ASL interpreters, students with one-on-one nurses, students with such severe breathing problems that we bring a respirator around and a rolling backpack everywhere we go. They're all getting services. So, you know, but people don't know this stuff.
Yeah. I really appreciate that, definitely, because it's true. I've heard from so many people that they don't know. We've got to get the word out for you.
Anything you can do to help, because you know, we try to put stuff out in the special ed newsletter. We have good news all the time. Once a month, I write to my bosses and I tell them good news from Bridges. And there's slideshows of the students doing work. We've taught them all how to do chores online.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
So
wow.
all the parents are really happy with us.
Can I send my kids to that? That would be.
Oh, I think Sherry just froze.
No. Oh no.
I know. Oh no.
Oh, here she is.
Are you
She's
back?
moving again.
Yes,
Here you are.
Comcast and I are having a difference of opinion about what is considered close to the router.
Oh.
I have a feeling I'm not going to win this argument.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome.
We really appreciate it.
And please keep us in the loop about your open houses. I would love to not only advertise them at our school, but at several others. I just think more people need to be aware of this resource and the work you're doing. So thank you so much. And I'm really excited to go back through your presentation. I was trying to take notes and eat dinner, and I'm not a very good multitasker right now. So.
It's hard to multitask.
It is. But thank you so much. I
Thank
really
you, folks.
appreciate you coming.
Yeah.
And sharing.
Thanks. Good night, everyone.
Good everyone. Good to meet you.
Good night, Sherry.
Good to meet you too, Sherry. Thank you.
Bye-bye.